Thanks for tuning back into the Conservation Podcast here at the Pike County Conservation District. My name is Emily. I'm the Communications Coordinator here at the district. And joining me today is Peter Wulfhorst from Pike County's Penn State Extension Office, and he's here to talk all about ponds. I'm here with Peter Wulfhorst, who is a Penn State Extension educator in the Pike County office. And last month I talked to Susan from Penn State Extension, and she called you Peter the Water Guy.
Yes, I do talk to people on water issues, wells, ponds, all those things.
Okay, so today we're going to focus mostly on ponds, right? So what is a pond? How do you know that it's different from like a lake?
Well, basically, a pond's a body of water, and the difference between a pond and a lake is the size. Okay. Ponds are much smaller. Lakes are much bigger bodies of water. Normally, the water is there year-round, and so a pond could be a quarter acre, a fifth of an acre, up to maybe 3 to 4 acres, 5 acres at the most. Then anytime you get things probably over, maybe 10 acres or so, you consider that a pond, but lakes are usually larger bodies of water, much more than a few acres. That's kind of really only the difference between the two. Okay.
So how do ponds form?
Well, there's several ways. One of the ways is around here, and these are mostly with lakes, but it could be smaller ponds, is the glacier, and parts of the Prairie Pothole region of North Dakota, South Dakota. There were glaciers that scoured the landscape and left behind ponds, small bodies of water. They've left behind lakes as well. So that's one of the ways. The most common way probably is people building them. Taking an area that was wet, maybe some standing water some time of the year, damming it up, especially if there's an inlet like a stream getting in there, or there are a bunch of springs that are feeding that. Damming it up and creating a water body. Or another way that could be is from a farm community. Sometimes if there's a depression in their fields, that could occur naturally, but then over time they could also, if they have an area like that and want to try and encourage water, somehow maybe dam it up if they have that inlet as well, and that creates the pond. So mostly it's through man-made activities. That's how ponds are created, or naturally through geologic glaciers and other geology features of the landscape.
Okay, but that's not so much around here as it is out in the Dakotas.
We have some glacial lakes around here that are, like the Twin Lakes up in Shohola, but ponds, most of the ponds I would think in Pike County or in the Poconos are created by man.
Okay, good to know. So why are ponds important to our landscape in the Poconos as a habitat?
Well, one of the things they're important for is they're store water, so they can then slowly, when water runs into them, capture it and let it then infiltrate into the ground. But they also provide habitat, especially ponds that are kind of created naturally, provide habitat for a lot of organisms. A lot of things like reptiles and amphibians, frogs, salamanders. I know they use vernal pools, which is a little different than a pond. A pond usually has water all the year, and so then it attracts fish that live there, and fish are predators of the amphibians that lay their eggs. But so they provide habitat for amphibians, salamanders. Some of them use them to change over. And they also provide habitat for certain avian species of birds that like to nest near water, red-winged blackbirds being one of them, and some other birds that kind of, if it's a pond with some vegetation around it, some trees around it, are good for them. And also ponds create habitat for like dragonflies and some type of insects that lay their eggs in the water. They also could be a problem for things like mosquitoes, which people don't seem to like, but they provide various habitat for various types of species. And then also even some mammals. Beavers rely on water bodies to raise their young, muskrats, river otters, those type of things. So depending on the size of the pond, you might be attracting some of those wildlife. And then also great blue herons and other birds that are feeding on fish will be attracted to a pond. So they provide a source of food for those animals. So it's kind of part of the food chain. Various critters will love to be near a pond and rely on them for habitat for their lives.
Yeah, definitely. And then that makes it a really good place, too, to go bird watching or just wildlife watching in general. Mm-hmm. So what are some signs that you're looking at a healthy pond?
Well, when you talk about a healthy pond has a whole myriad of plants in it. You could have plants on the outside, along the edge, plants under the water. A healthy pond, we look at maybe 30-40% cover with aquatic plants. So you have a variety of those: emergent plants, submerged plants, floating plants. Anytime you start to exceed that and you get too many of those aquatic plants, then you run into possible issues that it's crowding out other organisms, and it's hard to really recreate on there, which is something that people like to do with their ponds. So usually a sign of a healthy pond is some vegetation. They're not people in lake communities sometimes talk about too many aquatic plants. Pond's not a swimming pool, so you have to have some aquatic plants if you want to have wildlife in there. So a pond should have about 30-40%, some vegetation on the edge. That makes up a healthy pond. Once you start getting a lot of aquatic plant growth, it kind of makes it not a very healthy pond. And there's a specific example. There's some ponds I've seen on Route 6 that really get overcrowded with vegetation, and that kind of then interferes with people's personal use of the pond. I mean, it still, I guess, would be a healthy pond, but if you're using it for some other purposes, it would make it detrimental for you to enjoy it. So a healthy pond has some vegetation, not too much, normally along the edge, because it does attract different creatures that we talked about to the pond,
right? From
an insect and bird and mammals and reptile and amphibian populations. But so that's kind of where we look for a healthy pond. I mean, once you start getting weird appearance of plants, you start getting different colors on the surface of the water from things like harmful algal blooms that might come up. All these are things that really aren't creating a healthy pond with those other things. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference between a healthy pond and an unhealthy one. Is just the amount of vegetation that's part of the ecosystem of the pond.
Right. Yeah, so it's important to have a lot of vegetation around the pond for the wildlife, but a lot of the vegetation that we might see could be aquatic invasive species. So what are some of those invasive species that people who manage ponds should be on the lookout for?
Well, there's one that's an emergent plant. These are plants that have a foothold on the edge of the pond, but then maybe creep into the terrestrial habitat. And one that's a lot around here is purple loosestrife, which is an emergent plant, which is a very pretty plant. That is an invasive one that if you see that along the edge of your pond, you should try and remove that if you can. You don't want to allow it to get too numerous around the edge of the pond because it really doesn't provide any benefit to local wildlife. There are some other things, maybe like Phragmites along the edge, which is, there's two kinds. There's a non-native Phragmites. They're the two most common. You're talking about invasives in the water. One of them would be that we've seen recently in some water bodies here in Pike County is curly-leaf pondweed. There's also things like hydrilla, Eurasian milfoil, and there's a few other aquatic invasives, parrot feather, water chestnut. So there are a bunch of things out there that if they get into your pond that aren't native, they can start to grow and then take over the pond, and that would be to the detriment of the natural aquatic plants found under the water. So there's some of the common ones you need to be after. I mean, below the water, you're not going to see much unless they come to the surface. So if you have a pond, you might want to get on it with a boat and just check it out. The purple loosestrife you'll notice around the edge of the pond. It's quite beautiful later here in the season, the summer season. So they're some of the ones you should be looking for. Now, if you do have a pond and you let people use it that bring boats from other areas, you might recommend that they clean it off. One of the issues with people traveling for watercraft from one water body to the next, they could be carrying hitchhikers. And so some of these invasives could be in a water body and somebody picks them up on the bottom of their watercraft, and then they put it in another water body, and so they transport them from one to the next. So that's one of the issues that for larger water bodies, not so much ponds, but depending on the size of the pond, if you use it and you invite people over to fish or just to boat in it, you might want to ask them to clean the bottom of their boat, especially if it's been another water body for these invasives. So there's some of the common invasive species. There's always new ones that somehow globally travel the world. So some things are coming from other places, but and then some of them, some of the invasives might not be invasive for the whole country. They might be invasive other parts of the country, and not normally found up here in the Northeast. But some of them definitely come from other parts of other parts of the world. So
sure.
Yeah.
So to combat those invasive species, we can pull them up by the roots, but we can also kind of help by planting native plant species, right?
Well, if you're building a pond, or if you have a pond, one of the things you might want to consider is emergent vegetation, maybe planting some of them. I don't think you really, for submerged or floating, have to really do too much. You'll start to see it populated with plants. Somehow they'll find the place to be in the water. For floaters, you might want to put in some water lilies. Just be careful because ponds are normally not as deep as a lake. And they're normally shallower, maybe 5 to 8 feet at the deepest. Could be sometimes a little deeper than that. Anytime you have some of these water lilies or other floaters, and water lilies would be the most common. Now, there are things like lotuses, and that's another invasive plant that's a floater that you just don't want to put in your pond. If you go like to a nursery and they have water plants, you just got to be cognizant of what those plants are, because some of them probably aren't found aren't native. So planting floating plants, you got to be a little cautious, especially ponds being not as deep as a lake, that they can extend and grow in the surface of water. So you need to control that. Emergent plants are good because they intercept any runoff that might be coming off the landscape, traveling towards your pond, and any kind of nutrients or sediment that might be in that runoff. Submerged plants, I wouldn't worry about planting too many things. They're going to start to show up in your pond over time. I would just worry about maybe some emergent plants, maybe some floating plants. If you want to go with submerged, make sure they're native. Things like coontail, naiad, alodia, bladderwort. But just be aware that depending on what's contributing runoff to that pond, you could be then adding additional over time nutrients, specifically phosphorus, that can then create an environment these plants are going to grow, especially if the phosphorus increases to capacities beyond that 30 to 40% we talked about earlier as a capacity for aquatic plants. So I wouldn't worry about too much about the submerged plants.
Sure.
Even if you have a current pond, you're probably going to have some submerged plants. If you're looking to build a new one, over time you'll get growth in there of aquatic plants.
So you would focus on like emergent plants around the edge. So what are some common native species that you would recommend for that?
One of the most common ones are cattails, rushes, sedges. There's pickerel plant, arrowhead plant. These are some emergent plants that you'll find around the edge of the pond. And like I said, they're good for intercepting runoff that's getting into the pond. And surface runoff is a big contributor to the water quality of these ponds and lakes. So they're probably some of the ones that you could plant. I'm not sure how many nurseries locally have these. You have to probably find one that sells these different plants. For a new pond, it's important to do that, just because you may have areas around it where there's no vegetation. For an existing pond, you're probably going to have some of them. If you want to supplement it, they're the ones you'd want to put in there. The other thing, if you have a pond, is to try and keep vegetation naturally so many feet away from the edge of the pond. I've seen ponds where people mow right up to the edge. Maybe there's some emergent vegetation on the edge. If you can have a buffer, a riparian buffer around the pond with a natural vegetation extending beyond the edge of the pond, that's a good thing to keep the quality of the water in that pond good and not allow additional runoff.
Yeah, absolutely. So for some of the older ponds, they change over time, right? And we call that succession. So could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Well, eventually all these ponds, and you can see it in some parts of North America where we have bogs, eventually they're going to want to go back to that type of environment. They're going to fill in, become a bog. That's the naturally occurring successional plan. That could take many years,
right?
many years here on Earth. There are cases where it could be speeded up, and mostly that is from just being the pond filled in, from maybe having not proper controls and keeping the runoff out of it. So eventually those ponds are going to want to become a bog and over time, but that takes many years, in most cases beyond a lifetime of us and the people here. So you're normally not going to see that because of the thousands of years that takes to occur. That's kind of the normal succession for any pond, for ponds, smaller waters of body that'll eventually over time. Some of them might continue to be a water body, but eventually they'll succeed into a bog or where there's just a lot of vegetation and not as much water.
Sure. So they slowly fill up with sediment, right?
Right, and fill in, and then other plants grow there. But man's activities can speed that up, just because we create things on the environment that, especially surface water, runoff getting into these water bodies.
And then, like you had mentioned before, the phosphorus kind of contributes to that excessive
that's a nutrient that's a limiting nutrient in an aquatic ecosystem. All plants use it, but in an aquatic ecosystem like a pond, it needs to be in a certain amount, a small amount. Anytime you start to increase that amount as a limiting nutrient, then these plants will start taking off and growing beyond the normal capacity. So that's kind of, and that phosphorus binds onto the sediment that's carrying it into the water body from the surface of the land.
Right. So a lot of people, like you had said, use their ponds for recreational purposes, for boating and fishing. And the PA Fish and Boat Commission came out with a new stocking regulation.
Yeah, it's not really, they call it a notice of stocking.
Okay.
So earlier this year, January 1st of 2024, they approved it. So it went into effect this year that if you're stocking any water body, now you might own a pond, it's on your land. Technically that pond is what we call waters of the Commonwealth. So even though it's on your property, you own it, it's water of the Commonwealth. So the Fish and Boat Commission does have some say over what takes place in that pond. And one of the things that they're concerned about is people putting fish into these ponds. And so you have to file a notice of intent of stocking. So it's on their website. You can complete it as a fillable PDF. You can send it as a hard copy by printing it out. You can do it online. You can email them. You would need this if you're stocking any water body here in the Commonwealth. There's a few exceptions, but for most of the ponds in the Commonwealth, you have to file this notice of intent to stock the fish. And you have to have it in your possession when the fish are stocked into the water body.
Gotcha.
The lake I live in, Walker Lake, on Tuesday we stocked our lake and we completed a permit. And I wasn't there, but I would presume that the people that are doing the stocking had the permit there on file. So that's what's happened. Now, there's probably not going to be many Fish and Boat Commission police out there policing this, but the justification from them is, I think, they're concerned about what people put in the waters of the Commonwealth. they want to make sure that the fish they'll be putting in are things that are native to the area. Mm-hmm. One of the exemptions or exceptions that sometimes people call, it's not too many of those little precast water bodies that people put in their yard, and they fill it with koi and goldfish and other fishes, and they use it for decorative purposes, and it has usually a water inlet coming in with water, and it recirculates the water and puts it back in that. I think that is an exemption if you have one of those and you're putting those koi, and you don't need this notice of intent. But for most people, if they're putting in things like bluegills, bass, trout, catfish, crappies, any kind of native fish, they're going to have this. They have to complete this notice of intent. And it's just a way for the Fish and Boat Commission to know what's being put in the waters of the Commonwealth.
Right.
If you're going to stock a pond, there are several things you need to know. Obviously, you need to know the type of fishery. Is it a warm water fishery or cold water fishery? Because certain fishes are more suitable. Like trout aren't going to be able to survive in warmer water. They need cold water. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, so they need a little more dissolved oxygen than things like bass, which are a warm water fish. So, be cognizant and aware of what you want to put in your pond if you're going to stock it. And the Fish and Boat Commission just wants to know what's going in there. Whether they'll say anything, I don't think they'll say anything, but at least they have some idea of what's being stocked in the ponds and the lakes here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that's the justification of why they came out with this. They've been studying it for a few years and finally came around to putting this. It's free. It's online. It's a one-page form that you fill out. You need to tell them what type of fish, the size of the fish, obviously the location of the water body, and some other information. Some people might think it's an overreach by the Fish and Boat Commission, but if you're stocking, it's a simple one-page form that you could fill out.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're using your pond for fishing or for any kind of recreational activities, boating, swimming, you want to make sure that you've got good water quality, right? So
yeah, water quality is important, and depending on what you use the pond for, there are different water quality parameters that can impact the use of that pond. Specifically, if you're using it for swimming, there is a threshold for E. coli bacteria. Mm-hmm. Unlike a well, where you can't have any. If you're using a pond for fishing, you can go up to so many colonies of E. coli, so it's important to test for that. And I think it's 126 colonies of E. coli bacteria is the threshold that you cannot exceed if you're using a water body for swimming. So you might want to test your pond for that, if you're specifically using it for swimming purposes. Other parameters it's good to know are, we talked about nutrients, nitrates and phosphorus. So both of these water quality parameters can impact the quality of the pond. As we talked about, phosphates affecting aquatic plant growth. Nitrates is another parameter that you don't want to get too many of. Most ponds aren't used for drinking water, but it's good to keep the nitrates in check in the pond as well. Then there's some other things like pH, which is the acidity, alkalinity level of the water body. That can affect the type of fish that might be able to survive in that water body. And then there's some other things that you might want to know, especially if you're using it for livestock watering or if you're using it to irrigate crops. And I don't think too many pond owners in Pike County do that. We don't have a lot of ag, but in agriculture areas of the Commonwealth, the people are using a water body to irrigate. A parameter like hardness is important to know, because if it's really hard water, it's going to clog up the pipes that are carrying the water from the pond to irrigate the crops. So it can interfere with that. If you're using a pond, which isn't common around here, for watering for water for livestock, there are certain parameters in the water, the pond and the water in the pond that, like iron and manganese, that if are high enough, create a taste issue, and so the livestock aren't going to drink the water because it tastes bad because of those metals that are in there. There's some things to know. And then other things like aluminum and is important because when we used to have the issue of acid rain, when we had a lot of acidity coming from the skies, and mostly rainfall is more acidic than alkaline that we receive. But when it was really bad, it was increasing the pH of the water bodies, and at a low pH or acidic level of water, the aluminum could dissolve into the water column, and aluminum's toxic to a lot of aquatic organisms. So these are some of the things it's important to know. I think the most important thing is the nutrient levels, also the pH. Another one that normally takes sophisticated equipment, I know here at the Conservation District, you have that when you monitor your streams, is dissolved oxygen levels. Yeah. Is another important one. But from simple water quality tests you can do through a lab, it's the nutrients, nitrates, phosphorus, pH, and then also if you're using it for swimming, it's the E. coli counts in the water that are important to know.
And you can get those quality tests from Extension, right?
The Penn State Extension offices here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania have test kits through the Penn State Analytical Lab. We offer pond test kits. They include all the parameters I mentioned, plus some additional ones. You can get it with E. coli or without E. coli. Like I said, E. coli is important to know if you're swimming in the water, just to keep people safe from getting sick. So yes, we have those test kits. They're in boxes that people can pick up at our office at 514 Broad Street in Milford, or you might call ahead to make sure we have some. Normally we do, but sometimes we have to order more from the Penn State lab, so yes.
All right, thank you. And besides those tests and all of the great information that you've given here today on the podcast, where are some other places that people who manage ponds on their property can get some more information?
Well, our Extension website has a lot of fact sheets, publications. I think it's extension.psu.edu is the Extension website. There are categories on there you would have to look through at the top. And one is on water, and then we have a whole section on ponds. And we have publications, we have fact sheets. If you have some questions and listen to this podcast, you can contact me at ptw3@psu.edu. Some of those publications I have that we can send to you as PDFs, but they're also on our website. We have things on, and I didn't talk about this, but one of the things that some people do is if they have filamentous algae, which is another aquatic plant that normally we get a lot of people calling us about. It's one of the more common ones that people use an aquatic pesticide to control. Grass carp is an alternative option to getting rid of new filamentous algae. We have information on that. We have information on on barley straw, on different types of plants. We have publications on how to manage for aquatic plants, how to manage a fish pond. So yes, we have quite a lot of resources there that have been prepared by extension educators and research extension water professionals on information on ponds.
That's awesome. And next month in June, there's an opportunity for people to come out and speak with you and our watershed specialist here, Rachel Marks, as you guys do a Twilight Pond Walk, right?
Yeah, we're doing one on June 24th from 6 to 8 at the Delaware Township Pond, which is adjacent to the Delaware Township building and near the ball fields off of Wilson Hill Road. It'll be from about 6 to 7:30. It's $10. You get information in a package of some of our handouts, but you'll get knowledge of Rachel and I to talk about the pond and look at some of the features of it, look at some of the things that contribute to its water quality, some of the things important that you need to know, especially if it's a structurally created pond, to keep the pond dam, the embankment in proper shape so you don't have any breaching of the pond or anything like that. So and water quality we'll talk about as well, and do some tests of the quality of the water at that pond. So so if you want information, you can contact me. Our website also has information on it through the Pike Extension office, which I'm not sure that the web address at this point, but you can contact me and we can send you a flyer on how to register for it. But we just did one on Tuesday night up in Susquehanna County. And I think we had about 25, 26 people there at somebody's pond that they put in a couple years ago. So there's a lot of good information. and you get to look at the pond, and hopefully some of the things might be relevant that you need to address on your pond or not, but you'll get information from Rachel and I about ponds and how to manage ponds.
All right, very cool. Looking forward to that. And is there anything else you'd like to share about ponds or about Penn State Extension?
No, I think I went over a lot of the things about ponds in Pike County. These are, like I said, either naturally occurring or man-made features. They people really like them, especially if they use it for aesthetic purposes. If they like to listen to the frogs in the spring calling or the birds when they arrive, from the south for the summer breeding season, or the dragonflies and other reptiles, amphibians that usually are populating ponds. There's a whole myriad of species that people like to watch, wildlife species. So no, I think I covered this topic pretty well, and if there's any questions, you can reach out to me.
All right, thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for listening to the Conservation Podcast here at Pike County Conservation District. If you enjoyed this episode and want to find more, you can find past episodes and new episodes. Our Season 2 episodes will be released monthly starting January 2024 on our website, pikeconservation.org, under the Education tab, or on Spotify. To stay in touch with us and find out more about our upcoming events, newly released podcast episodes, and tips and tricks for conservation at home, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and sign up for our email monthly newsletter, which you can find the sign up link at the bottom of our website, pikeconservation.org. Thanks for listening.